Okay, Kyle, ready?
Ready to rock and
Let's
roll?
talk Notre Dame football again. And I know it's only been a few weeks, Kyle, but as we said when we parted ways, that either we were going to talk again for maybe a big game down the road, or maybe it would be some other interesting news story, some other headlines, and usually those aren't good headlines, and that's exactly what's happened at this point in time. Because not only did Notre Dame lose their second straight to open the season, but they've lost their starting quarterback.
Excuse me. Yeah, I mean it's been a tough couple of weeks in South Bend. I think that I might even mention this when we talked last. That my main concern about Tyler Buchner was his ability to stay on the field. Didn't have a senior season that was due to COVID, but his sophomore year of high school was entirely missed due to a torn ACL. He missed the Notre Dame spring game from a sprained ankle. Just like little things like that, he was banged up at points of last year with some lower body injuries, and Notre Dame was in a real pickle, I guess, on Saturday against Marshall because they could not do anything on offense. They could not execute in the run game, pass game, anything. The only thing that was working was running Tyler Buchner. He got a pretty heavy dose of carries, and I know I was sitting in the press box with some of my cohorts, and I was like, I don't know about running Buchner this much. And they looked at me with like a stink eye. They're like, "Are you crazy? Like he's the only thing that's working." Well, towards the end of that game, he got hurt, and that was my big concern. And now Notre Dame is 0-2. All the pressure's on, all the lights are on. The sports information staff in Notre Dame rolled out the offensive defensive coordinators this week, which hasn't been done in probably over a decade during the season. They're usually pretty closed off. So there's just been a lot going on, and yeah, now Buchner, as you mentioned, was he's a big loss now, and Drew Pine's going to take over as a starting quarterback, and it's like it's early in the season. Notre Dame's 0-2. They don't really have much to play for at this
Yeah,
rate with the current makeup of the college football playoff, but it's like a must-win game already this early in the season.
yeah. Unless the team runs the table, like you said, there's not much else except the future. And there was an outside chance that Notre Dame could be a playoff contender when the season began, but a chance nonetheless.
Oh yeah,
They were there if everything, especially with the schedule that they throw out there every year. It's very competitive. But at this point, that's just not going to be the case. This still doesn't mean you can't play in a big game. There's going to be some other nice games to watch this season. Clemson, Brigham Young looks like they're going to be a very good team, and of course USC, the last game of the season. So there's a lot to play for. So let's start at quarterback now. Now Pine's a four-star kid.
yeah, 4-star as rated by Rivals. So formerly a 4-star recruit, but does not have nearly the amount of upside or intangibles as what Tyler Buchner did. He's certainly a good football player, but he's no Tyler Buchner.
And what's the major differences between the two?
The major one would be Tyler Buchner's running ability is significantly better. I think that you're going to see the offense, that part of it really change. Now, I mean, Buckner's lost for the season, so it's pretty much it's going to be Pine moving forward. So I don't really expect Notre Dame to run as much with the quarterback as they did with Buchner. That was one of Buckner's best assets was his ability to run. The other thing that just looking at the makeup of Tyler Buchner and Drew Pine is Buchner had a little bit stronger of an arm, a little bit more talented in that aspect,
Okay.
but even through 2 games this season, Tyler Buchner had a lot of difficulty on his deep throws. So that wasn't even really a big plus for Notre Dame. So I think that the other type of difference that you're going to see is, I guess, throughout the last basically month now, Notre Dame had named Tyler Buchner the starting quarterback. He's been the guy for the last month. So they've shaped the entire offense, the entire team. Everything has gone through Tyler Buchner, and now they're switching it to Drew Pine. And he's a good player in his own right. He's got a big chip on his shoulder, but I just like in terms of some of the raw ability and tangibles, that's where Drew Pine is lacking compared to Buchner.
Well, I know when we talked a few weeks ago, and we went over the running game, and losing Williams was a big loss, no question about it. But there were some, potential. There was a couple of guys, and I know one of them, Estime, I believe you thought could be somebody to keep an eye on, and it was Chris Tyree. But why, with the offensive line, has that been the biggest disappointment so far? There's a lot of hope on the offensive line, and if you're not running the ball, I mean, Estime's got a 2.8 average. You don't need me to tell you that. Even Buchner was 2.5. That's not going to get it done. I know they played Ohio State, but Marshall's a team that you should be able to own the line of scrimmage. So is that the most disappointing part of the team so far, the offensive line?
Yeah, I think without a doubt. I mean, coming into this season, when you looked at the way Notre Dame improved on the offensive line toward the end of last year, there was a lot of optimism, a lot of confidence with that. And, I think what really hurt them is Jarrett Patterson going down earlier in the season or in the preseason, an All American, type candidate player on the interior offensive line. And, they lose him for Ohio State. So that's a leader on that line. And, a guy who's a fifth-year captain, a two-time captain. He's obviously extremely talented player. And that's a big part. And I think that, for Ohio State, where you saw a lot of those difficulty, you can chalk it up to, okay, they didn't have Jarrett Patterson. Both their, young and super talented tackles are both true sophomores. And I guess the guard play has been another weakness as well. So I guess when you look back at the Ohio State game, you can kind of chalk it up to that. Obviously the Buckeyes have a super talented front,
Sure.
but I just watching that game on Saturday, I was just like bewildered to see that Notre Dame could not get a push up front. And I was thinking the same thing as you. Like, this is Marshall. Like, obviously they got, what 25 or so Division One like
Sure.
FBS transfers or Power Five transfers, that is. But this is a much different ball team than Ohio State. And coming into the season, the O line was supposed to be probably the strongest unit on the team, especially with Harry Heason coming back. But it certainly has not been that way. And I think that just looking back on the the players on that offensive line, I kind of mentioned they do have two true sophomores at both tackles. Blake Fisher, I think, has only started this Saturday. Will be his fourth or fifth game.
Okay.
He started two last year, two this year, and Joe All, I mean, he was a third string left tackle coming into last season. Obviously, played unbelievable down the stretch this year. Or last year was recognized for it as a freshman All American as well. But yet again, he is still a true sophomore. Not a ton of experience or adjusting to a new offensive line coach and Harry Heastand. Obviously, Coach Heastand had been at Notre Dame before, but I mean, this is completely different players, recruits, everything. I think they're maybe only one guy that would have even been recruited by Heastand at Notre Dame, and that's Josh Lugg.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, my long answer to your question is, I mean, I think the offensive line has by far been one of the most disappointing parts.
All right. And let's also bring up the fact that there's a head coach there with no head coaching experience. So you're still in the honeymoon period. What's
Not
not
anymore.
anymore? It's over. So what's the fan reaction to the job that their young head coach has done so far?
I think it's been a disappointment, which is probably a little bit undeserving for Marcus Freeman because he is a first-time head coach. He's only coached 3 games, and this is at Notre Dame, where first-year head coaches have not ever succeeded, at least recently. And he kept the basically Tommy Reese, the offensive coordinator, intact. He was able to keep some guys on the defensive side of the ball, but there's a lot of new coaches on that staff, and this is first time obviously being the CEO of a program. So there was going to be some growing pains, but I don't think anyone expected the growing pains to be this significant, and I guess come this early on with this type of loss against Marshall. I don't think any Notre Dame fan in their right mind was really expecting Notre Dame to win against Ohio State. I think maybe if you want to throw like a bold prediction, like, oh, Notre Dame could upset
Sure.
Ohio State week 1. And the Irish played pretty
Yeah.
strong throughout the first 3
Sure.
quarters. But obviously, I think taking a look at last week's game, just a major disappointment, just no execution on both sides of the ball. So, I mean, obviously, like any fan base, Notre Dame fans among some of the most passionate in all of sports, let alone college football, there's a real short leash. And on our message board over the last week, there's been a lot of blame on Jack Swarbrick, the athletics director. We even had a poster or start a thread to fire Freeman. A lot of people are kind of looking back, like thinking, well, was really hiring a first-time head coach the right move when we've seen these woes, this early on. So, I mean, obviously these are fanatics. So I guess some of these responses are expected, but I think it's just been a major disappointment to start. I guess something that stuck out on Saturday when they played Marshall is before the game, when the team was running out on the field, they introduced, Marcus Freeman is your head football coach. Stadium just went nuts. And by the game, I mean, it felt absolute ghost town walking around that campus after the game. It was just every ounce of life was sucked out of that fan base. And now it's like, I don't think it's – I mean, Marcus Freeman is basically playing for his job at this rate with the type of pressure that's on him to win this week and kind of start to right that ship.
Yeah, and it happens because, to be honest with you, I mean, when I judge this team from an outside perspective or the season so far, I actually thought that Notre Dame was going to have a letdown last week. And I thought they were going to have a letdown because you're coming off an emotional, you're prepared months for this Ohio State team, and it's a big game, and you lose. And there's got to be a disappointment there. And then you got to come right back and get right back into it. And I just felt letdown was definitely possible. And throw in the fact that you have a young coach. But so when I look at it though, when I say that, it's like, wait a second, put the brakes on. I don't think it was unpredictable that they struggled last week, especially because the offensive line, for whatever reason, is just not playing up to their standards. So while it is early, they got to go right back into it on Saturday and take on a tough team. I mean, not a high-powered offensive team, but a tough defensive team with a very smart defensive coach in Justin Wilcox that's going to have the opportunity of trying to make a backup quarterback's life as hard as possible. So it's not going to get very easy moving forward, and I wonder how much patience in reality the fans are going to continue to have. Not the ones that are going to jump ship immediately, but even the ones that were there for Marcus Freeman from the get-go.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the difficulty with Drew Pine coming in, starting and going against a Cal defense who, I mean, it's not Alabama, but I mean, in their own right, have played, very well throughout the first 2 weeks of the season. The opponents have, are what they are, but you play who's on your schedule. And, with the struggles with Drew Pine on that, or I guess some of the weaknesses on that offense, Notre Dame wants to be a run-first team. They can outrun the football. You mentioned Audric Estime's yards per carry earlier. It's atrocious. Chris Tyree, who's the best running back on this team by far, I think, is what we've seen throughout this point in the season. He only had one touch in the first half of last week's game, and that was basically a meaningless touch, and Notre Dame's own territory just to burn the clock out.
He's got 9 carries to Buchner's
Ridiculous.
24 as a quarterback, and then Estime 19.
Yeah, and I don't think Estime's not his production, but how involved he's been so far this season. I don't think that's been surprising because I know I came on here last week. I was kind of pumping him up. He looked great in camp. We talked to Dylan McCullough. He said that Audric Estime was going to be really involved this year in the offense. So that hasn't been a big surprise. But what has been the surprise was Chris Tyree not being involved in this offense and the lack of involvement that he's had. Obviously, Notre Dame has really struggled to run in between the tackles. And one of the best things that Chris Tyree, his best assets, is running outside the tackles, getting him in space and things like that. And we really haven't seen Notre Dame do a lot of that. But going back to Pine and, I guess the tasks that he has this Saturday, the Notre Dame wide receivers, not a lot of excitement with that group this year. They have one good guy in Lorenzo Styles, sophomore. They have a real, I guess, highly rated, exciting freshman, Tobias Merriweather, but he's just not ready to see the field yet. So the wide receivers kind of are what they are, and they're not great. And Michael Mayer can only do so much. And I thought he had an outstanding game last Saturday against Marshall, but obviously the outcome did not go in Notre Dame's favor. So yeah, I mean it's not going to be an easy task for Drew Pine whatsoever, and I think that there's a lot of pressure as well. And,
Absolutely.
having to play, with that type of pressure, I think is going to weigh on those guys a lot.
Pine. So is Pine more of a pro style pocket passer then?
Yeah, I think that's how you would kind of see him. Yeah, definitely. He's not. I even think when rivals classified them as recruits, I know Buchner I'm pretty sure he was a dual threat, and then Pine was a pro style guy. So that's certainly been their type of game in college.
And that's
as well.
Again, like you said, that's a major difference when you've prepared for a while to run a certain offense, and then you got to switch it right back to a complete. That's why usually you have similar type of quarterbacks, and it's going to be the similar system. But it is what it is. What happens? Nobody wants to hear this, but what happens if anything happens to Pine? What happens?
So the quarterback room is extremely, extremely light right now. And part of that is as a result of Notre Dame losing Phil Dracovic to Boston College, which but that was a couple years ago now. So they should have been able to rebound from that. They had the opportunity to take a transfer this year. They elected not to. They really wanted to give, I guess, the battle Pine and Buchner. Buchner was always kind of had the leg up, highly touted recruit, a lot of excitement. I think he always had, the nod to be the starting quarterback. It was just more so of a formality when it happened and actually giving him all the reps. But behind those two guys, you have two scholarship quarterbacks, Steve Angeli and Ron Powell Jr. And I guess to my knowledge, I certainly have not seen anything change otherwise, but they are the only two other quarterbacks on this roster. They don't have any walk-ons, nothing. I mean, those are the two guys, and that's not a great position for Notre Dame to be in. Ron Powlus, he's on scholarship, or at least last we knew, but he's not really a scholarship level quarterback. So that pretty much leaves you with Steve Angeli, a true freshman, has looked really good in I guess doses. He had a really nice end of the spring game. He had his moments during camp, but once again, he's also a freshman, and he going into the Ohio State week, the last time we got to watch practice, Angeli was working with the scout team offense, so he hasn't even really ran the Notre Dame offense in a couple of weeks. So that's completely going to change his workload during practice and his focus. So it's like, how ready is Steve Angeli? He's a true freshman. Obviously, he was here in the spring, so that certainly does help. But behind Pine, it's really light, and you certainly got to be worried, because if Pine goes down, then I'm not sure what they're going to do.
It could always be worse. There could always be other issues down the road, so it's not all that bad if you really think about it. Sometimes. By the way, Paulus, name sounds familiar.
Sure does. Yep. His dad, I believe, went to Notre Dame. I'm like 95% sure of that, but he works at Notre Dame now as well. I'm probably dating myself. I'm a little on the younger end.
Yeah,
so,
I think he was quarterback, right? Ron Paulus, was it?
That's correct. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
That's correct.
Yeah, I remember that name. Okay, so by the way, what did Buchner passing wise? And I know it wasn't much that he didn't have much time, but what was there something specific that stuck out in his passing game that he was looking good at, or was he having issues with? Because in the first game, it looked like he was wasn't anything exciting, but he looked like he was pretty measured. It looked like, it was not bad for a young quarterback and a road start like that. He kind of handled it okay. But just overall, did he look like what you thought he was going to look like?
I think Tyler Buchner looked like a young quarterback that hasn't had a lot of experience, which is why his start, basically to start the season, start the game against Ohio State, he was 8 of 8, I think, about
Yeah.
a buck 50 yards, maybe a little less than that. But it was super impressive. Like, he was incredibly poised, and in that environment, it's like, okay, well, Notre Dame can work with this. Like, there's something here. And then going in to the second half of that game, kind of came back to reality. I think he finished the game 10 of 18, so it was 2 of 12 or whatever that is, 2 of 10 to close out the game there. And against Marshall last week, wasn't fantastic. He's been pretty reliable in like the intermediate game. I
Okay.
guess like any throws within like 10, 15
Okay.
yards, but anything beyond that, it's just I'm not sure he even completed one last week. I would have to look at the stats, but that was certainly the weakness in his game. Overall, I mean, he was serviceable in other areas, but I think that looking at his performance against Ohio State, maybe took a step backward in terms of thrower. He still excelled as a runner.
Sure.
He fantastic in that part of the game, but in terms of his passing ability, a work in progress, and that's what makes this injury to Buchner, losing him for the entire season, so painful, because this was your quarterback of the future. This is a guy I'd probably expect to have 2 more years after this year, and I mean, I'm sure that will stay the same now that he's basically missed the whole entire season. But you're basically back to square one at the end of this year. So that's what has been one of the most disappointing parts about losing him for the season.
Yeah, I mean, it is surprising that, I mean, no, this is Notre Dame, and I know academically it is hard. I get that, but it's Notre Dame. You wonder why they couldn't have a little bit more depth at the quarterback room, and I always said that even when Kelly was on board. I always wondered
Mm-hmm.
why they just didn't have more talented, quarterbacks. You say whatever you want to say about how elite, whatever. But the fact is that I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm getting old and I just think of Notre Dame a little bit different than the young kids today. I don't know. I just think that would be a destination spot, especially when they have a network of their own for their games. But whatever the case may be, it is what it is. And as of right now, you mentioned the freshman quarterback that's in the room now. Is there anybody else coming, recruiting wise?
uh, no,
No.
and it's a major issue.
Wow.
They don't have a 2023 commit, and they are, putting it nicely, screwed in 2023. They have completely disastrously recruited the quarterback position in 2023, and I'll cut Tommy Rees some slack. Not entirely his fault. They were going after Dante Moore, 5-star quarterback from Detroit. Uh, Basically told Notre Dame that he was coming. Not exactly, but Notre Dame felt he was going to end up at Notre Dame. They felt he was going to commit publicly. They felt he was going to be the guy. And circumstances pushed Dante Moore to Oregon. I'm sure you can put 2 and 2 together of why a Detroit quarterback would go all the way out west to Eugene, Oregon. And after that, Notre Dame is completely flopped on quarterback recruiting. They tried to offer Baylor commit Austin Novosad. They got him on campus in late July for a visit. Just nothing really happened there. He ended up sticking with Baylor. Novosad was also getting touted by Texas A&M and Ohio State. But he just stuck with his original pledge with the Baylor Bears. I guess it is what it is. Once again, not entirely Notre Dame's fault, but they also offered Kenny Mitchie, a quarterback from Tennessee, and he's committed to Pitt. He's shown, at least from what we can kind of report, or I guess our knowledge, he's not really shown much interest in Notre Dame, or I guess it kind of hasn't gone both ways. Notre Dame likes him, but I'm not sure we can say how much Kenny Minchie likes Notre Dame
Wow.
right now. And besides that, I mean, There's Avery Johnson, a quarterback that's committed to Kansas State that they offered, had some momentum with before. They really went in on Dante Moore. Could they go revisit him and try to flip him? But I think that ship might have sailed as well. So they don't have anyone, which leaves them to C.J. Carr from Saline, Michigan High, the grandson of Lloyd Carr. His father played at Michigan. If you know anything about the Carr family, they are the University of Michigan. And C.J. Carr commits to Notre Dame over the summer. I think we have him rated as potential 5-star guy at Rivals. He's a top 25 player, top 5 pro-style quarterback. Certainly one of the best in the entire country. And CJ is a little bit older for his grade, so he's 17 years, and he was born in May, so I think 3 months old now. He also took a gap year in between 8th grade and freshman year to work on a church mission trip. So he essentially should be a senior. And because of his academics, he does have the ability to
Oh,
reclassify.
okay.
That's something Notre Dame has really been pushing him to
Okay.
do. Well, I guess not necessarily. I saw CJ last week, and he didn't really feel the pressure to reclassify. But let's just say they've made that option available, and
Okay.
I think that's their last resort right now, and probably their only resort is for CJ Carr to reclassify. Otherwise, I don't know who they can get. Which is just talking out loud, like you said. This is Notre Dame. Like, you should be able to get a quarterback, but for whatever reason, that hasn't been the case.
And I'm not even saying they have to go. Oh, there should be 5 stars all over the place. But I mean, come
No,
on,
somebody.
somebody that's talented to go out there and be a legit Power 5 quarterback. It's amazing. It's like I look at and I see these guys. Even Michigan has that kid from Texas Tech as a 3rd-string quarterback. It's like, what is he doing there, Alan? That kid, Alan Bauman. So I don't even know why he decided to go to Michigan. I don't know. Maybe there's some personal reasons to it, but you get these quarterbacks in these places that are backups, and it's like Notre Dame can't even get them on to start. So
Yeah, I guess one final note on that is, transferring is challenging at Notre Dame. That's not compared to other schools.
yeah,
Admittance and credits transferring over and those types of things. It's a little bit more difficult at Notre Dame compared to other places, but still, this is Notre Dame. You think you should be able to get a quarterback. And like I mentioned, I mean, there was some talk about Slovis potentially going from USC to Notre Dame, but just never, I guess, went that direction. I don't know if Notre Dame really even pursued it because they went on Buchner. So, I mean, they certainly have the ability for transfers. It just hasn't happened for whatever reason. I think they're certainly going to dip in the transfer portal this year. I mean, they pretty much have no choice
oh
at this
well,
rate.
I can imagine if Freeman is if he survives the season, he's going to be doing everything in his power to bring in a transfer. That's for sure. But we'll see. It's a long season. Next time we talk, hopefully there are more pleasant things to discuss as far as Notre Dame, especially the offensive line, because there's talent there still. So it's only 2 weeks, and we'll see how things go. What's your gut tell you about Saturday?
Uh, Notre Dame fans are probably going to hate me. I just don't feel good about it.
I
I
hear
mean, I
you.
guess it's kind of hard to feel good about it. I mean, we don't have the ability to watch practice, so we can't really see, how the team's looking leading up to the week. So all we really have to go off of is what we saw last Saturday. And what I saw last Saturday is a Notre Dame team that is, does not look good. They look kind of lost, and now they've lost their starting quarterback. And it's like, okay, Cal's coming in, pretty decent defense, like they're no slouch. Notre Dame, last time I checked, they opened as I think an 11.5 point
Yeah.
favorite, but it's like, do I really? I like Cal to cover that, but I was like, I don't even know if I really like Notre Dame to win. I just got a bad gut feeling that it could be a loss, which is probably a good thing because I think Notre Dame will end up winning. But
Okay.
I think the big thing is I was thinking about this earlier. Once they win, it'll be
Oh
great.
yeah.
I think they can get some momentum rolling. I think that you see a completely different team once they win. But now they have that grill on their back, and there's a lot of pressure on them. And it's almost like every single play, every time you do something, you have that in the back of your mind, like we got to get this first win. And I think it's hard to win under those type of circumstances. I just don't have a good gut feeling. Like I said, I can only go off what I've seen
Sure.
last, and They have a backup quarterback, and I'm not going to feel great about this team until I see them really turn around their product on the field.
And they better do it quickly because if for whatever if they go 0-3 and you look at that schedule coming up, now you think in the beginning of the season, well, we could be this good, so there's games that they should be able to win. Now all of a sudden you would have to look at your team as an 0-3 marginal team with a schedule that looks that much more tougher.
Yep.
So all of a sudden you're looking at it. We have to fight for a bowl season if they lose this week. So
yeah,
that's not good.
Yeah,
but it takes one, just like you said. Just take one win.
Exactly. It's just like all the pressure is there now. If they beat Marshall and then they lose this week, yeah, it's going to be. People aren't going to be happy, but it's going to be a little bit different. You still had that first win, but now it's just like all the pressure is mounting, and I can't imagine what it's like to be in that position.
Well, again, I certainly hope we'll talk again this season because there are a bunch of good games and intriguing games to talk about. So if Notre Dame can get competitive, then maybe we'll have a chance to talk again. So I'm looking forward to that. And obviously, especially later in the season when we start to even think closer towards the players that are going to be maybe leaving and heading to the NFL draft, and we can get an opportunity to get your evaluation on how some of these players look, especially if they do intend to leave, and depending on who those players are. So, appreciate it, Kyle. Thank you very much, and best of luck on Saturday.
Absolutely. Thanks as always, Greg.